Look, lady, this isn't a commercial flight. If you can't even stand straight in a little turbulence, you've got no business being on this ramp. The words, amplified by the C-17's cavernous interior and the scream of four engines fighting the thin air at 30,000 feet, were a blade of pure condescension. The crowd, a mix of seasoned Air Force loadmasters and younger Navy SEALs, rippled with nervous laughter. It was a cruel, easy joke, and Sergeant Rex Rhino Davies, the jumpmaster whose booming voice had just delivered it, grinned with the satisfaction of a man who believed he owned the space around him. He was a mountain of a man, his flight suit stretched taut over a barrel chest, his face a permanent mask of cynical authority. He pointed a thick, gloved finger at the lone figure standing nearest the gaping maw of the open ramp. I said, "Are you clear in the jump sequence? Or do I need to draw you a picture?" But the target of his scorn offered no reaction. Not a flinch. Not a sigh. Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma remained perfectly still, a statue carved from calm amidst the chaos of the depressurized cabin. Her gaze was fixed, not on the mocking sergeant, but on the small, unassuming red light above the ramp, waiting for it to turn green. Her stance wasn't unsteady, as Rhino had so loudly proclaimed. It was the deeply rooted posture of a career mariner, an almost imperceptible sway in the knees that absorbed the aircraft's every shudder and vibration, making her a part of the machine itself. Her non-reaction was a vacuum, and Rhino's arrogance rushed to fill it. He lumbered over, his boots clanking on the metal deck, and stood over her. She was of average height and build, and, in the bulky halo gear, her form was almost androgynous, deliberately unremarkable. This, to Rhino, was an unforgivable sin. It was a lack of presence, a lack of the overt, theatrical masculinity he equated with competence. But when the general's aide, observing from the cockpit jump seat, saw her stance, he felt a flicker of something else. Not weakness, but a profound, unnerving stillness that belonged to a different order of being. If you believe true strength is measured in silence, not volume, type competence in the comments below. Sergeant Davies was not a man to be ignored. He saw her silence not as discipline, but as disrespect, a personal affront to his authority as the king of this airborne castle. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he barked, his voice straining to be heard over the roar. "What's your deal, anyway? You some kind of diversity hire they fast-tracked to make the numbers look good? Let me see your jump log. Let me see it now." He made a great show of the demand, waving his hand impatiently, ensuring every jumper on board was a witness to this public interrogation. The younger SEALs shifted their weight uncomfortably, their loyalty torn between the rigid hierarchy of the military and the gnawing feeling that this was wrong. They saw a fellow sailor being dressed down by another branch, and it stung, but they also saw a jump master who held their immediate safety in his hands. So they remained silent, their complicity hanging in the frigid air like their frozen breath. Sharma, with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic, didn't speak. She simply unclipped a small, ruggedized datapad from her chest rig and held it out to him. Her movements were fluid, practiced, each one honed by thousands of hours of repetition until they were as natural as breathing. Rhino snatched the device from her hand, his eyes scanning the screen with theatrical skepticism. "Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma," he read aloud, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Goo. Paperwork can say anything. The sky, sweetheart, the sky tells the truth. It has a way of weeding out the people who don't belong." He tossed the datapad back at her chest. She caught it without looking, her eyes never leaving the red light. It was this absolute lack of engagement, this refusal to acknowledge his dominance, that infuriated him the most. He was trying to start a fire, and she was giving him nothing but a vacuum. Her gear, to a casual observer, looked standard. But to a true professional, it was a library of whispered secrets. Her helmet was a custom-molded carbon fiber shell, not the standard issue model. Her oxygen system had a secondary regulator he'd never seen before, and the altimeter on her wrist was a commercial model favored by extreme alpinists, known for its barometric precision in rapidly changing conditions. These were not the tools of a novice. They were the carefully curated instruments of a master craftsman, each piece chosen and modified for a purpose beyond the understanding of a man like Rhino. Captain Marcus Thorne, the grizzled commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, watched the entire exchange from the relative quiet of the cockpit access ladder. He didn't intervene. He was an observer, a student of his people. He had heard rumors for years of an operator within DevGru, a ghost who specialized in impossible insertions, someone whose entire file was a fortress of black ink and redactions. The name was always different, a phantom, but the description was always the same, quiet, unassuming, with a focus so absolute it bordered on supernatural. He watched Sharma's hands as she made a minute adjustment to her oxygen feed, her fingers moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon, and he felt a cold certainty dawn on him. He wasn't just watching a chief petty officer. He was watching a legend, and she was about to be tested by a fool. The mission was already on a knife's edge. This wasn't a simple training jump. They were simulating the clandestine insertion of a hypersensitive, next-generation sensor package, a device worth more than the aircraft carrying it, into a hostile environment blanketed by sophisticated enemy radar. The package, a bulky, awkward cylinder nicknamed the PIG, had to be dropped with pinpoint accuracy from an extreme altitude to minimize detection. Its own guidance system was supposed to activate mid-fall, but the real challenge was the initial manual drop. The jumper had to exit the aircraft with perfect stability, acting as a human guidance system for the first critical 10,000 feet of freefall. A single error, a slight tumble on exit, would send the pig into an unrecoverable spin, rendering it useless. The primary jumper, a young, cocky SEAL named Miller, was wired into the pig's diagnostics. Suddenly, his voice crackled over the internal comms, tight with panic. "Jumpmaster, I've got a red light. Guidance system isn't syncing with my NAV board. I can't get a lock." On the main screen, a blinking red icon confirmed it. Synchronization failure. The drop window was less than 90 seconds away. The mission, a cornerstone of a multi-billion-dollar intelligence program, was about to be scrubbed. The collective groan in the cabin was audible even over the engines. Months of planning wasted. Rhino's face went from smug to crimson. A mission failure on his watch was a stain on his perfect record. "Recalibrate, Miller. Now," he yelled, his voice betraying a hint of his own panic. "We don't have time for this." But the system was unresponsive. The connection was dead. It was in that moment of rising chaos, as hope began to curdle into failure, that Sharma moved. She didn't wait for an order. She didn't ask for permission. She simply acted. She glided across the deck and tapped Miller on the shoulder. Her movements were so smooth, she seemed unaffected by the turbulence that had everyone else braced. She pointed to the red light on Miller's display. Then she pointed to the PIG, which was still lashed to the floor. Then she tapped her own chest. Finally, she pointed out the open ramp into the swirling, dark abyss. The meaning was unmistakable, a sentence delivered in 4 silent gestures. "The system is broken. Give it to me. I will do it manually. I'm going." Miller stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe. A manual drop with a dead guidance system, at this altitude, in these winds? It wasn't just difficult. It was considered impossible, a theoretical exercise in failure analysis. Captain Thorne's voice, calm and clear, cut through the comms from the cockpit. "Jumpmaster, you heard her. Re-rig the payload. Execute." Rhino spun around, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. "Negative, Captain. She is not rated for this payload. Her file doesn't say." Thorne's voice dropped 10 degrees, becoming a shard of ice. "Sergeant, you are the jumpmaster on this aircraft. You will follow the order of the ranking officer. That is my order. That is your only function right now. Acknowledge." There was a beat of stunned silence. Rhino, for the first time, was speechless. He looked from the calm, waiting figure of Sharma to the comms panel, a man trapped between his ego and a direct command from a superior he knew he could not cross. He finally choked out a single, resentful word. "Acknowledged." The transformation was breathtaking. The moment the order was given, Sharma ceased to be a passive observer and became a whirlwind of focused, efficient energy. The PIG was designed for a two-man carry, a clumsy, 200-pound beast of carbon fiber and electronics. Sharma unlatched it from the deck and, with a single, explosive motion that seemed to defy her physical size, hefted it into position against her own rig. It wasn't brute strength. It was a perfect application of leverage and biomechanics, a martial artist's understanding of mass and momentum. While the other crew members scrambled to help, she was already 2 steps ahead, her hands a blur as she secured the heavy payload with a series of custom-made magnetic clasps and load-bearing straps from her own kit. She wasn't just attaching it, she was integrating it, making the awkward cylinder an extension of her own body. The pig's digital interface was dark, its guidance system completely inert. To everyone else, it was a dead piece of equipment. To Sharma, it was simply a ballistic object, a problem to be solved with physics, not electronics. She ignored the dead screen and instead pulled a small, analog compass and a wind gauge from a pouch on her leg. Holding them in the slipstream of the open ramp, she took a reading, her eyes glancing from the instruments to a series of grease pencil marks she had made on her own forearm. She was doing the calculations in her head, factoring for wind shear, air density, terminal velocity, and the Earth's rotation. She was becoming the guidance system. The red light above the ramp turned to a steady, vibrant green. The jump window was now. Go, 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 Rhino screamed, his voice a mix of residual anger and desperate hope. But Sharma didn't go. Not yet. She took one final, calming breath, her entire body relaxing. Then, as the aircraft passed over the invisible drop point, she didn't jump. A jump is an act of propulsion, an exertion of force. Sharma simply fell. She executed a perfect dead stick exit, a technique of such sublime difficulty that most jumpers only ever read about it. She simply let gravity take her, stepping off the ramp as if stepping off a curb, her body perfectly rigid, her center of gravity flawlessly aligned with the cumbersome payload. She didn't tumble. She didn't spin. She simply dropped like a stone, a perfectly stable platform, disappearing into the blackness of the night sky in less than a second. The effect on the crew inside the C-17 was profound. It was as if a switch had been thrown, cutting all sound. The roar of the wind was still there, but no one heard it. Everyone, from the young SEALs to the grizzled loadmasters, and especially Sergeant Rex, Rhino Davies, stood frozen, their eyes locked on the empty space where she had been. They had just witnessed something that defied their understanding of what was possible. On the main tactical screen, the icon for the pig was still a dead, gray box. Then, after an agonizing 10 seconds of freefall, it flickered. A single line of green text appeared, stark against the black background. Manual override detected. GPS handshake. Positive, a second line appeared. Target acquired. Payload on block. Then the final, impossible confirmation. Terminal guidance engaged. Estimated CEP, 0.5 meters, sub-half meter accuracy. From 30,000 feet. With a dead system. Rhino stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open, his face bleached of all its arrogant color. The words he had spoken just minutes before echoed in his mind, a mocking ghost of his own ignorance. The sky tells the truth, and the truth it had just told had shattered his entire world. A heavy hand fell on Rhino's shoulder, making him jump. He spun around to see Captain Marcus Thorne standing beside him, his face impassive, seemingly unaffected by the biting cold of the open cabin. The captain's eyes weren't angry. They were something far worse. They were disappointed. He had seen this kind of institutional arrogance before, and it was a disease he had spent his career trying to eradicate. It was the enemy within, more dangerous than any foreign adversary because it bred complacency and incompetence. Thorne's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the lingering shock like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't a shout. It was a pronouncement. "Sergeant Davies," he said, his gaze flicking to the Jumpmaster's console. "You will access the unredacted service record for Chief Petty Officer Sharma. You will display it on the main screen for all personnel to view." Now, it was not a request. Rhino, his hands suddenly clumsy and slick with sweat inside his gloves, fumbled with the console. He had to enter his own credentials, then override them with Thorn's command-level access code, which the captain provided in a low, steady tone. Each keystroke felt like a hammer blow to his pride. He typed in Sharma's service number, and the file loaded. The screen, which moments ago had displayed the triumphant success of the mission, was now filled with the silent, overwhelming truth of the woman who had saved it. The assembled crew stared, their mouths agape, as the text scrolled into view. The narrator's voice in their heads was a staccato drumbeat of undeniable fact. Name, Sharma, Anya. Rank, Chief Petty Officer, E7. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, NSWDG. A collective, audible gasp went through the cabin. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. The name itself was a thunderclap, a whispered myth of the modern military. It was a unit that didn't officially exist, the tip of the spear the operators called upon when failure was not an option. The file continued its relentless assault on their assumptions. Jump log, 3,247 total. Halo/HHO jumps, 1,912. Combat jumped, 412. Primary specialty, advanced Halo/HAHO operations, special equipment insertion, unconventional warfare. Awards, Navy Cross. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device, X4. Purple Heart, X3. Presidential Unit Citation. The list seemed endless, a constellation of the nation's highest honors for valor and service. Qualifications: Master Naval Parachutist, Military Freefall Jump Master, Lead Test Operator for the PIG Advanced Sensor Program. It was that last line that landed like a physical blow. Lead Test Operator. She hadn't just used the equipment. She had been instrumental in its very creation. Captain Thorn let the information sink in, allowing the weight of the truth to press down on every person in the bay. He let the silence stretch, a testament to the magnitude of their collective misjudgment. Then, he turned his full attention to the pale, trembling figure of Sergeant Davies. His voice remained level, devoid of passion, which only made his words more devastating. "Sergeant," he began, "let me be perfectly clear so that no one here ever makes this mistake again. You looked at Chief Sharma and you saw a woman. You saw someone smaller than you. You saw quietness and you assumed it was weakness. You were wrong on a level that could have compromised national security." He pointed a single, steady finger at the screen. "You didn't see an unqualified operator. You saw the person who literally wrote the manual on high-altitude, heavy payload insertion. The manual that you, Sergeant, are certified to teach from, but apparently have not fully read. The sensor package she just dropped with a dead guidance system. She designed the prototype for its magnetic harness system in a workshop in Damascus, Virginia, 3 years ago. The unsteady stance you mocked? It's a core principle of high-altitude stability, designed to counteract asymmetrical wind shear, a detail covered in Chapter 4, page 87, of your own Jumpmaster's Handbook. Thorn took a step closer, his eyes locking with Rhino's. "And that dead stick exit you thought was a stumble? That you were prepared to mark down as a near-fatal error? It is a signature technique known as the Sharma slip. It's taught only to a handful of Tier 1 operators. It minimizes the thermal and radar cross-section of a jumper on exit, making them virtually invisible to certain detection systems. She didn't stumble, Sergeant. She performed a maneuver of such exquisite skill that most of the freefall community believes it to be a myth." He paused, letting the final, crushing weight of his words settle. "You did not question her competence. You stood on this ramp, in front of your crew and my men, and you questioned the very standard of excellence that this nation pays us to uphold. You saw a ghost, and you mistook her for a rookie. Then, Thorn did something that sealed the moment in legend. He turned away from the humiliated Jumpmaster, faced the open ramp, and keyed his comms to the ground team. Harbinger, 1, this is Trident Actual. Give me a status report on Ghost Lead." The reply came back instantly, the ground operator's voice filled with a reverence that bordered on worship. Tried an actual ghost lead is on the ground. The PIG is not just on target, sir. It landed directly on the painted X we use for calibration. I think she scuffed the paint. She has already established a secure perimeter and is beginning primary diagnostics. Flawless jump, sir. Absolutely textbook. Captain Thorne nodded slowly, a grim, satisfied look on his face. He keyed his mic one last time, his voice now booming through the entire aircraft's address system, a final lesson for all to hear. Let this be a reminder to every one of you. Assumptions are a luxury we cannot afford. Competence has no gender, no size, and no uniform but excellence. Dismissed. The story of that night didn't just spread, it detonated. It moved through the tightly knit special operations community with the speed of an encrypted burst transmission. It was told in hushed, reverent tones in the sterile ready rooms of Fort Bragg, in the dusty chow halls of Bugram, in the wood-paneled officers' clubs of Coronado. The pilots of the 160th sore spoke of the Air Force jumpmaster who was silenced by a Navy ghost. The Green Berets debated the physics of the Sharma slip, trying to replicate it in their wind tunnels, and failing. The telemetry data from the jump was immediately classified at the highest level, but the essential, unbelievable numbers leaked out. A sub-half-meter circular error probable on a non-guided payload, dropped from over 30,000 feet in blizzard-force crosswinds. It became the new gold standard, an impossible bar against which all future clandestine insertions would be measured. The jump itself was given a code name in the classified mission logs. Operation Humility, the legend of the ghost of the Globemaster, was born, a cautionary tale and an inspirational myth all in one. For Sergeant Rex Davies, the aftermath was a crucible. He received a formal letter of reprimand from his commanding officer, a black mark on an otherwise perfect career. But the administrative punishment was nothing compared to the internal one. The arrogance that had been his armor for so long had been shattered, leaving him exposed and humbled. For days, he was a recluse, replaying the events in his mind, the memory of his own booming, ignorant voice a source of burning shame. He spent hours in his quarters, not watching television or drinking, but reading. He read every manual, every technical order, every after-action report he could get his hands on. He read Chapter 4, page 87, over and over again, the words a testament to his own willful blindness. Then he did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He walked into Captain Thorne's temporary office on the base, stood at attention, and formally requested permission to use the recording of his own voice from the C-17's cabin recorder as a training tool for new jumpmasters. "Sir," he said, his voice steady but stripped of all its former bravado, "I failed. I want my failure to mean something. I want it to prevent someone else from making the same mistake." Thorne studied him for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod of approval. Rex Davies had lost his arrogance, but in its place, he had found something far more valuable: character. And what of the legend herself? Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma was completely, blissfully unaware of the firestorm her actions had ignited. For her, the jump was simply a task, executed to the required standard. Mission complete. The whispers, the awe-filled stares, the newfound deference from the other operators. It was all just noise, a distraction from the work. Days later, she was back in the anonymous, oil-scented confines of a DevGru workshop in Virginia, a place where the real magic happened. She was meticulously cleaning her gear, field stripping the custom rig she had used on the jump, inspecting every stitch, every buckle, every molecule of its construction for signs of stress or wear. The work was her meditation, her sanctuary. A young SEAL, the same one who had been the primary jumper on the aborted mission, approached her with the cautious reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. He was a mountain of a man, an Adonis of muscle and confidence, yet in her presence he seemed small, humbled. "Chief," he began, his voice barely a whisper. I was there, on the C-17. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." How did you do that?" Sharma didn't look up from her work immediately. She continued to methodically reassemble a complex trigger mechanism from her parachute's automatic activation device. Then she paused, picked up a single, perfectly machined titanium bolt, no bigger than his fingertip, and held it up to the light. "One piece at a time," she said, her voice quiet and even devoid of any ego. "You make sure every single component is perfect. You check it, you clean it, you know its breaking point. You do the work, the slow, boring work, 1,000 times when no one is watching. Then, when they are watching, you don't have to think. You just act." She looked at him then, her gaze direct and penetrating. "You focus on the work, not the noise." She put the bolt down and pointed to a small section of stitching on the young seal's own harness, which was hanging nearby. "Your bar tacking on that load-bearing strap is frayed," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, not critical. "1 in 1,000 chance of it failing under extreme G-force. But one is not 0-inch in that single, quiet act of mentorship. In pointing out a tiny flaw that could mean the difference between life and death, she taught him more about being an elite operator than 100 triumphant war stories ever could. She had given him the secret. It wasn't about glory. It was about the relentless, silent pursuit of perfection. 1 year later, the sun beat down on the tarmac of the same remote airfield, the air thick with the smell of jet fuel and nervous sweat. A new class of SEAL candidates, their faces a mixture of youthful bravado and raw fear, were gathered for their final briefing before their first-ever Halo qualification jump. They were the best of the best, the survivors of the brutal crucible of BUD/S, and they felt invincible. Their instructor gathered them not in a classroom, but at the base of a massive training tower inside the main hangar. He was an Air Force Master Sergeant now, his face leaner, his eyes holding a quiet wisdom that hadn't been there before. It was Rex Davies. He had become one of the most respected and toughest instructors in the Joint Special Operations Command Parachute School. He didn't yell anymore. He didn't need to. His quiet authority was absolute. He pointed to a small, unassuming brass plaque affixed to the hangar's corrugated metal wall. It had been placed there personally by Captain Thorne months earlier. The plaque bore no name, no unit crest, no grand proclamation. It was simple, stark, and deeply meaningful to those who knew the story. It showed only a date, a set of geographic coordinates, and a single, elegant silhouette of a lone figure in freefall, perfectly stable against an unseen wind. "Before you go up," Davies told the trainees, his voice low and resonant, "you look at this. This marks what we call the Sharma line. It's not a line you cross on a map. It's not about altitude or speed." He paused, letting his gaze drift over each of the young, confident faces before him. "It's the line between ego and duty. It's the line between talking about the standard and being the standard. It's the line you cross when you stop worrying about how you look and you start focusing entirely on how you perform." The story had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth whispered from one generation of operators to the next. Newcomers were told the tale of the loudmouth jumpmaster and the quiet chief who taught him, and an entire command, the true meaning of professionalism. The plaque wasn't a memorial to a person. It was a monument to a principle. It was a permanent, silent reminder that the most dangerous enemy on any mission is your own assumption, your own prejudice, your own ego. True strength, the kind that alters the course of events and inspires legends, is rarely found in the thunder of a boast or the clamor for recognition. It is forged in the silent, lonely hours of relentless preparation, in the deep, monastic dedication to a craft so profound that it becomes an extension of the soul. It is the quiet confidence of the master who has faced the abyss 1,000 times and has learned its secrets. Legacy, in the end, is not a statue carved in stone or a metal pin to a chest. It is not what you leave behind in a display case. It is what continues forward in the actions and beliefs of others. It is a standard passed down, a lesson learned in the humbling, deafening quiet that follows a moment of impossible truth. It is the story of the Sharma line being told to a new generation of warriors, ensuring that the lesson of that cold night in the sky will never be forgotten. It is the quiet professionals, the ghosts in the machine like Anya Sharma, who are the true architects of victory. They do not seek the spotlight, for they know the most critical work is always done in the shadows. They don't just win the battle, they define the very meaning of the fight. They prove, time and time again, through action and not words, that respect is never demanded. It is the silent, inevitable echo of proven, undeniable competence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent dedication defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.